Join me in my kitchen while I share with you how to turn a real, locally grown pie pumpkin into pumpkin puree for pumpkin pie and all types of delicious, sweet, and savory pumpkin recipes. I'm Abby with The Heirloom Farmer, and these are the heirloom pie pumpkins my family and I grow on our farm in central Pennsylvania. We've been saving seeds from these pumpkins for several generations, and we think they make the best pumpkin pie. But don't take my word for it. Stop by our farm store and get your own pie pumpkin so that you can try it for yourself. Now, roasting a pumpkin and turning it into puree is actually much easier than you might think, and the flavor is well worth the little bit of time and effort it takes to turn this pumpkin into puree. And I'm going to show you just how easy that is today. So the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 350, and you're going to need a baking sheet or tray that you can fit the pumpkins on in your oven. You may want to move your rack to one of the lowest positions as well, because we're going to be cutting the pie pumpkins in half and setting them cut side down on the sheet. So depending on the size of your pumpkin, you're just going to want to make sure there's plenty of room in your oven. Now, wash your pumpkin and then use a sharp knife to slice your pumpkin in half. Do this carefully, and again, I do recommend a sharp knife, and I actually recommend you start by putting the point straight down through the pumpkin. That is going to allow you to cut through the skin. It is a little bit tricky, as you can see, but you just want to split your pumpkin right in half. I will often roast two or three pumpkins at the same time, but you can certainly do this with one or multiple pumpkins as long as you have room for them in your oven. Now, you want to scoop out the guts of your pumpkin, the seeds, and everything in the center of your pumpkin, leaving the hard or firm outer flesh. Now, I save seeds from our pumpkins, so I scoop out the guts and the seeds all together, and I put them into a bowl, and then I will clean and separate those later. And then I will save the seeds and dry them to plant next year. And then just scrape out any of the remaining soft parts till you're left with just the shell of the pumpkin. Now, you can do this with any pumpkin or squash to get a puree. Each pumpkin or squash is going to have a different flavor and texture. I do recommend choosing a variety that is a pie pumpkin or that is good for baking, because some pumpkins have a slightly better texture and flavor than others. So these pie pumpkins obviously are one of my favorites. A butternut squash has a great flavor. The fairy tale pumpkins are also a really good one for pumpkin puree. So if you're not local and you're not able to get one of our pie pumpkins, check with another local farmer in your area to see what they recommend. Now, you can take your pumpkins and place them cut side down on your baking tray. I'm going to scoop just a little bit more. I missed a few spots in here. You don't have to get it perfectly clean, but I'm going to go ahead and get those bits out. And I'm going to place them on my baking tray like this. I'm gonna actually go ahead and add another pumpkin here since I have room. And you can put a little bit of water on your baking sheet to prevent the pumpkins from scorching, or just keep an eye on them again to make sure that they don't scorch. But I usually don't have a problem with that. So I'm just gonna put these into the oven at 350, and I'm going to allow them to roast for about an hour. After that first hour, I'm gonna start checking them about every 15 minutes. And you just wanna keep roasting them until they're nice and soft, and so you can easily just stick a fork through them. And then I will show you what to do next. The pie pumpkins were in the oven for about an hour and a half, and they are now very nice and soft. If I take a fork and poke them, it easily goes through the skin and the flesh, and that's what we want. Now, they are extremely hot because I just pulled them out of the oven. So I'm going to let them sit here on the baking sheet and cool. Now, one thing you can do that will help them cool a little bit faster and that will release some excess moisture is to, again, carefully because they're hot, is to kind of flip them over on their side. You see all that steam that just came up. So I'm gonna flip them over, let some of that steam out, because we really want a good condensed thick pumpkin puree. So the more water that comes out, the better. And again, this will help them cool a little bit faster because that skin isn't holding the heat in. I'll let them sit here on the counter, and then once it's cool enough for me to easily touch and work with, I will show you the next part of the process. Now that the pie pumpkin has cooled enough for me to easily touch it, I'm going to take a spoon and I'm just going to scoop the flesh away from the skin. Now, there's a bunch of different ways to do this. You can peel the skin off depending on how cooked everything is. Sometimes the skin breaks apart, but I have found the easiest way is to just use a spoon and scoop the flesh away from the skin of the pumpkin, and you can use everything except for, the skin. So go ahead and scoop that out. I scoop it right into a pan, depending on the amount of pumpkin I have, either just a small saucepan or a bigger pan like this. Because what you're going to do next is you're going to run the the pumpkin either through a food mill, or what I like to do is use my immersion blender to puree the pumpkin. And that works really well, I have found. Now, depending on the type of pumpkin, some are more stringy, or if you get little bits of skin mixed in with the flesh, you may want to use a food mill to end up with a finer, cleaner pumpkin puree. But I have found that with our pie pumpkins and with just being careful not to get skin in the flesh, that using my using my immersion blender is much faster and works really well for creating a nice puree. So I'm going to put it all right into this pot, and then I will use my immersion blender right in the pot to give it a nice puree. And then I will simmer the puree on the stove to make sure I get a nice thick consistency. Now, there are several different ways you can do this as well. So if you have a pumpkin that seems to be really watery, so you have a really wet, runny puree, one thing you can do is let that puree sit in a container and put it in your refrigerator or just on the counter, and the liquid will actually start to separate out. And then you can drain some of that liquid off. You can do the same with cheesecloth and let some of the liquid drain out that way. But again, with our pie pumpkins, I don't find there's that much liquid in them, so I just simmer it a little bit on the stove top. And what that does is it creates a nice texture and a nice thick pumpkin puree that I can then simmer until it gets to a consistency I really like. And if you're making pie, you really want to have a nice thick consistency. And I have found often, if someone is used to cooking pie from canned pumpkin puree, the first time they cook a pie with real pumpkin, sometimes they get frustrated or disappointed because their pie ends up watery or runny. And usually the cause of that is the pumpkin puree had too much liquid left in it. So if you've struggled with that in the past, it's not the fresh pumpkin that's the problem. It's just that you want to reduce your puree down to be a thicker consistency before you use it in your pie. All right, so I'm just going to keep scooping this off, and I kind of scrape my spoon across the skin to get as much of the pumpkin off of the skin as I can, so that then I'm just left with the pumpkin skin. And you can put that in your compost, feed it to your chickens, whatever you want to do with the scraps of the pumpkin. And as I mentioned, I'm just gonna scoop all of this off and run my immersion blender through it. And then if you want to use the pumpkin right away, go for it. But you can also freeze the pumpkin puree. I found that to be the best method of preserving the pumpkin puree is to freeze it. And I freeze it in 2-cup increments or 1-cup increments, depending on what I want to use it for. Most pie recipes call for 2 cups. And so that's what I will freeze it in. And then I just get it out and let it thaw when I'm ready to use it. And really it's that easy. Very little hands-on time with the pumpkin, and you get a beautiful, delicious pumpkin puree. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer comments or questions that you have in the comments. If you go to our website, The Heirloom Farmer, you can also download a printable guide on making pumpkin puree that includes 2 of our pie pumpkin recipes, a traditional recipe, and then a pie recipe that is sweetened with honey. So if you want to grab those, go to theheirloomfarmer.com, put in your email address, and I will send you that download right away. But I hope that you enjoy baking with fresh pumpkin this year. And again, if you're local, be sure to stop in and get a pie pumpkin at our family farm. All right, thank you and God bless.